My mom lunged at me. She didn't even hesitate. 1 second we were in the kitchen, and the next she was screaming in my face and swinging her arm like I was the enemy. All because I said, no. Just one word, no, and suddenly I became the selfish, heartless daughter who didn't care if her brother lived or died. But it wasn't that simple. It never is, right? Hey everyone, welcome to HD Reddit Stories. If you've ever been blamed for not giving enough when you've already given too much, you might relate to this. I'm here to tell you a story that started with an emergency surgery and ended with me cutting ties with the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And before we dive deep, let me ask you this. What would you do if your family expected you to destroy your future for someone who never gave a damn about yours? Let me know in the comments, and if stories like these resonate with you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more revenge-packed, real-life drama every week. Back to that moment in the kitchen, her eyes weren't sad. They weren't pleading. They were angry. Furious. Like I had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. But I hadn't. I had just stopped. Stopped bending. Stopped breaking. Stopped trying to be the glue that held a cracked family together. My brother was in trouble again, yes. But wasn't he always? This time it was an emergency operation he needed money for. Last time, it was a business investment. Before that, a car accident. Before that, a loan shark threat. You name it, we've seen it. And guess who they always turn to for help? Me. The responsible one. The one with a steady job, a savings account, a future. And I always helped. Until I didn't. That day, when I finally said, I'm sorry I can't. My mother didn't just look disappointed. She looked disgusted. Like I had spat on our family name. Her voice shook with rage when she said, After all we've done for you? I wanted to laugh. Done for me? They had taken, and taken more until there was barely anything left. And now they wanted the last piece. My stability. My savings. My peace. But here's the thing, they didn't just want my help. They expected my sacrifice. I think the breaking point didn't happen in a single moment. It was the accumulation of years of silent sacrifices, 1,000 tiny cuts, each one dismissed with a, You're just being dramatic. Or, That's what family does. Growing up, I didn't notice how tilted the scales were. When you're a kid, you think every family works like this. You think it's normal for your mom to make you split your allowance so your brother can buy snacks. You think it's normal that when he fails a class, she blames the teacher, but when you get a B+, she asks why it isn't an A. You think love is something you earn, and guilt is just the price of being good. My brother Caleb was the sun in my mom's sky. Every mistake he made was a misunderstanding. Every lie he told was stress-related. And every problem he created was someone else's fault. He was charming, reckless, and always broke. And somehow, I became his insurance policy. When he crashed his first car, I gave up my savings from 2 summer jobs to help pay the deductible. When he dropped out of college, twice, I was the one who spent nights editing his resume and helping him find jobs, even when I was drowning in coursework myself. And when he borrowed money from people he shouldn't have, and they came knocking at my mother's door? She turned to me with those tired eyes and said, You have a steady income, don't you? It wasn't just the money. It was the constant expectation that I'd step up, clean up, cover up. And I did. Because somewhere along the line, I thought if I just kept giving, eventually they'd stop asking. That maybe, one day, they'd look at me the way they looked at him, with that blind adoration, that pride. But that day never came. Instead, I became invisible in my own home. Holidays weren't about me. Conversations revolved around Caleb, his dreams, his misfortunes, his potential. When I got promoted at work, my mom barely looked up from her phone. When Caleb got a traffic ticket, she organized a family meeting. I remember once, just once, I snapped. I told her I was tired of always being the backup plan. She stared at me and said, You're stronger. He needs more support than you do. You should be proud you can help. Proud. That word clanged in my skull like a hammer. I wasn't proud, I was exhausted. I was angry. And worst of all, I was starting to resent them in a way that scared me. Because once you see the pattern, once you realize love in your house came with conditions, it's hard to unsee it. Still, I stayed. I told myself I'd move out next year. Then the next. Then the next. I watched from the sidelines as Caleb spiraled further, gambling, disappearing for days, showing up only when he needed something. And my mother? She stayed his #1 fan. Every disappointment was followed by a home-cooked meal, a warm hug, and another ask from me. The turning point came last Christmas. Caleb arrived drunk. He started yelling at Mom over something petty, money, I think. She cried, I tried to intervene, and he shoved me. Not hard, but enough. Enough to send the message that I was just an obstacle between him and his next bailout. I remember looking at Mom, expecting her to scream at him, to finally stand up for me. Instead, she whispered, "He's just having a rough time. Don't make it worse." I left the next morning. It took me a few weeks to find a small apartment. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. No one barged in asking for favors. No one drained my bank account. No one called me selfish for not handing over my paychecks. I slept better than I had in years. And for a while, I thought that maybe I could still keep a relationship with Mom, at a distance. We'd talk on the phone every Sunday. She'd ask if I was eating enough, and I'd ask if Caleb was okay. It was surface level. It was manageable. But then came the call. The one that brought everything crashing down. "Caleb needs emergency surgery," she said, her voice trembling. "It's serious. We don't have the money. I know you're doing well now, so please." It wasn't the first time she'd said that. And yet, something about this time was different. Maybe it was the way she assumed I'd say yes before I even had a chance to breathe. Maybe it was how she never asked how I was doing. Maybe it was the way she made his life sound more valuable than mine. I asked questions. What kind of surgery? Which hospital? Had they tried getting aid? She got defensive, like I was stalling, like I was already planning to abandon him. She cried. She guilt-tripped. She begged. And when I said, "I'm sorry, I just can't this time," her tone changed. "You're heartless," she hissed. "He's your brother." That was the moment. The real break. Not because of what she said, but because I finally saw it clearly. I was never a daughter in her eyes. I was a resource. A solution. An obligation. Later that night, she sent a string of texts. Some manipulative. Some cruel. She reminded me how much she'd sacrificed, raising me alone. She accused me of being cold, of turning my back on family. Caleb texted too. "Hope you sleep well knowing you're letting your brother die." I sat on my floor, phone in hand, shaking. Not from sadness. From relief. Because now, there was no doubt. No gray area. No more pretending. This family wasn't breaking. It had already broken. I was just finally stepping away from the wreckage. I didn't respond to my mother's last text. Or the 4 that followed. Or the missed calls. Or the voicemail Caleb left, slurring my name as if guilt could somehow translate into obligation. I knew if I responded, even a single word, it would pull me back in. So I did what I hadn't done my entire life. I let the silence speak for me. But silence has its consequences. A week later, I got a notification on Facebook. My mother had posted a long message, tagging relatives and family friends. It was vague enough to protect her from being outright accused of slander, but pointed enough that anyone with a brain knew who she meant. "Some people forget where they come from," she wrote. "When your own child turns their back on their brother in his time of need, it's heartbreaking. But God sees everything." Comments flooded in, sympathy, support, thinly veiled condemnation. My aunt wrote, "That's so sad. I hope your daughter realizes what family means before it's too late." A distant cousin chimed in, "Kids these days only think of themselves." And there it was again. That same narrative. I was the villain. The selfish daughter. The cold-hearted one. For 2 days, I hovered over the reply button. I drafted angry responses. Deleted them. Typed them again. Deleted them again. I didn't want to play into the drama, but I also couldn't stay quiet while they dragged my name through the mud. So I decided, if they wanted to bring this public, so would I. But I wouldn't do it through a rant. I'd do it with proof. The next morning, I took a personal day off work and drove straight to the hospital where Caleb was supposedly admitted for his emergency surgery. I wasn't going there to visit. I was going for answers. The front desk clerk gave me a strange look when I asked for Caleb's room number. "We don't have anyone by that name checked in," she said after scanning the system twice. Are you sure you have the right hospital? My stomach dropped. He's supposed to be here for surgery, I said carefully. He had an emergency procedure last week. She shook her head. Sorry. No record of that. I walked out of that hospital with adrenaline in my veins. Either they'd taken him somewhere else, or there was no surgery at all. And deep down, I already knew the answer. I went home and pulled out an old box from under my bed, bank statements, wire transfers, Venmo screenshots, years' worth of receipts documenting every dollar I had sent them. I started organizing everything, building a timeline. Thousands of dollars. Every emergency. Every loan. The so-called investment fund for Caleb's startup. That never existed. The rent I paid for 3 months when he said he'd been evicted, only to find out he had been living with a girlfriend, rent-free. The therapy sessions I had paid for in full, only to find out he never attended a single one. By the time I finished compiling the evidence, I had a 30-page document of deception. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth. About reclaiming the narrative they were twisting beyond recognition. So I wrote my own post. It was simple. Direct. Not cruel, but honest. Since my family has chosen to speak publicly, I feel it's time I tell my side. For over a decade, I've supported my brother financially through addiction, job loss, legal troubles, and fabricated emergencies. I've given everything I could, emotionally and financially, until I had nothing left to give. Recently, I was asked to fund another emergency surgery. I checked the hospital. No such admission exists. I have documented every transaction, every lie, and every manipulation. I will not be guilted into enabling anymore. If you want to judge me with facts, not sentiment. And then I attached a Dropbox link with redacted proof, just the highlights. Enough to silence the whispers. Enough to flip the narrative. I hit post. It exploded. Within hours, people who had been parroting my mother's words were backtracking. Some messaged me privately, apologizing. Others went radio silent. But the damage to their reputation was done, not by me, but by their own lies unraveling in daylight. My mother tried to call me again. I didn't answer. Caleb left a voicemail screaming into the receiver, calling me a traitor, saying I was ruining his life. I blocked him. But I wasn't done. I remembered something else, something most people overlooked. Tax records. You see, for years, my mother had been collecting government benefits while also receiving untaxed gifts from me to support Caleb. Technically, she was committing fraud, because she never reported those amounts. I had never cared before. But now, after all the public humiliation, the gaslighting, the social smearing, I cared. So I submitted an anonymous tip. I know what you're thinking. Harsh. Ruthless. Maybe even petty. But I was done playing the role of the responsible daughter while they played victims. Actions have consequences. And they had finally met mine. Weeks passed. I went quiet. Focused on my life. On healing. My job performance improved. My sleep was peaceful. I even started dating again, something I hadn't dared to try for years. For the first time, I felt untethered. Light. Free. Then I got the letter. A formal notice from the IRS confirming receipt of a report. It didn't say what would happen next. But I knew. And I didn't feel guilty. I didn't burn their house down. I just turned off the faucet they were using to flood mine. One night, I ran into an old family friend at a grocery store. She looked uncomfortable, holding her basket like it could shield her from what she wanted to say. Finally, she asked, "Was it all true? Everything you posted?" I looked her in the eyes and said, "Every word." She nodded quietly. "I wish you hadn't had to do it that way." And I smiled. Not out of bitterness, but because of what I said next. I wish I didn't either. But I did it the way they forced me to. Because when you're pushed into silence long enough, the truth doesn't just leak out, it erupts. 3 months after I posted the truth, everything went quiet. No new calls. No guilt-tripping texts. No Facebook rants from my mom. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on their performance, and the whole show just stopped. But I knew better. Silence wasn't peace, it was a recalibration. And deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Then one morning, I got a message. Not from my mother. Not from Caleb. But from a lawyer. It was a brief email, formal and cold. Your mother, Mrs. Eleanor Graves, has listed you as the primary contact regarding her recent financial review and property matters. I blinked at the screen. What property? What review? Apparently, the IRS had officially opened an investigation. Not just into unreported gifts and benefits, but into her joint filings with Caleb, who had apparently used her name as a co-signer on multiple loans. Loans he never intended to pay back. Loans I never knew existed. The lawyer's tone became more desperate in the follow-up message. She is requesting assistance in resolving these matters. Assistance. They were asking for help again. After everything. I didn't reply. I didn't even forward it to my trash. I left it there, unread, festering, like the final test of whether I'd break my own boundaries again. I didn't. Weeks later, I got a message from an old neighbor. Your brother moved back in with your mom. Place looks rough. Cops were there last night. Everything okay? I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I was done taking responsibility for people who'd never taken responsibility for themselves. I had spent years thinking I was abandoning them if I said no. The truth? They'd abandoned me the second they saw me as an asset instead of a daughter. But not all endings are explosions. Some are slow dissolves. The real closure came when I bumped into my aunt at a wedding. She approached me with the hesitation of someone expecting a cold shoulder, and for good reason. She'd been one of the loudest voices in the comment section during the Facebook drama. I didn't know it was that bad, she said quietly, eyes lowered. We only heard what your mom told us. I nodded. That's the problem. Everyone only ever hears her side. She looked up then, and something shifted. You're better off now. I can see it. And I was. I moved to a new apartment, one with sunlight that poured in through the windows like an old friend. I'd started therapy, finally facing the trauma I had normalized for far too long. I'd built new routines. A new life. A real sense of self not tethered to the approval of people who only loved me conditionally. I still had bad days. I still had moments where I wondered if I'd made the right call, especially when birthdays passed without a text or holidays felt quieter than they used to. But every time I second-guessed myself, I revisited the facts. The silence. The lies. The weight I no longer carried. And I remembered how light I'd become since I'd put it all down. The most unexpected part? The way my story resonated with others. That one post, my attempt to defend myself, ended up being shared, reposted, discussed in online forums. Strangers reached out. People I didn't even know messaged me to say, I thought I was the only one. Your story gave me the courage to cut ties too. I finally understand it's okay to walk away. That did something to me. It turned my pain into something useful. Something honest. It made all the years of self-doubt feel, not worth it, but at least not wasted. They became proof that surviving dysfunction is not betrayal, it's a reclamation. Eventually, I changed my number. Closed my old social accounts. Started fresh, with fewer people, but more authenticity. And Caleb? Last I heard, he was still bouncing between friends, burning bridges like matches. My mom? I don't know. Maybe still waiting for the daughter she could guilt into fixing everything. But that daughter is gone. Now I am someone who chooses peace over performance. Someone who knows that love without respect is just manipulation dressed up in family colors. Someone who walked through the fire and came out carrying the matchbook, not to burn others, but to light my own path. Some people say blood is thicker than water. But I've learned that love, real love, is thicker than guilt. And I choose love. Even if it never comes from them. Especially because it never did. If there's one thing this experience has taught me, it's that family isn't defined by obligation, it's defined by choice. For the longest time, I believed love meant sacrifice. That the more I gave, the more I'd eventually earn their affection. That if I just kept being dependable, forgiving, and available, maybe one day they'd see me. Not as a wallet. Not as a fix-it girl. But as someone worthy of love on my own terms. I was wrong. What I learned, through years of giving and barely receiving, through guilt, shame, and silence, is that unconditional love cannot exist where there is conditional worth. You cannot build self-worth on a foundation of debt. You cannot expect peace in a house where you are only valued for your utility. My mother wasn't evil. Caleb wasn't a monster. That would have made it easier. They were just deeply flawed people who had learned to survive by shifting their weight onto others. And I happened to be the one who didn't push back. The strong one. The stable one. The good daughter. But being good isn't the same as being whole. And being strong doesn't mean you have to carry everyone else's chaos. What I regret the most is not leaving earlier. It's how long I tried to earn their approval instead of acknowledging I already deserved respect. I kept showing up to a game where the rules were always changing, and I was always losing. I kept asking for fairness from people who didn't know how to play fair. But here's what else I've learned: boundaries are not walls. They're bridges to yourself. To the version of you that is no longer bending over backward for temporary peace. To the person who knows their limits, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. And respect is everything. I used to think choosing myself was abandonment. That walking away was cold. That saying no meant I didn't love them. But it wasn't about love, it was about patterns. And if love keeps hurting, keeps taking, keeps asking you to bleed for it, then it's not love. It's control. It's need. It's fear, dressed in the language of loyalty. There's this lie we're told, especially in families with dysfunctional roots, that you owe the people who raised you your everything. That repayment is the same as gratitude. But real gratitude doesn't ask you to destroy yourself to prove it. Real love doesn't punish you for protecting your own peace. One of the hardest things I had to accept was this: closure doesn't always come with apologies. You don't always get to hear, "I'm sorry." You don't always get to explain why you walked away. Sometimes the people who hurt you will keep telling the story their way, and you have to let them. Because the story that really matters is the one you live now. And mine? It's quieter. Simpler. But full of integrity. I wake up without dread. I spend my money on things that feed my soul, not fix someone else's disaster. I surround myself with people who celebrate me, not just when I'm useful, but when I'm simply me. I no longer confuse silence with peace. I no longer call manipulation family dynamics. I no longer apologize for choosing myself. Healing isn't always pretty. Sometimes it means letting go of people you thought would be there forever. Sometimes it means grieving the parents or siblings you wish you had. Sometimes it means accepting that love, for you, will have to start with yourself. But that's the most beautiful part. When you stop waiting to be saved, you realize you've been the hero all along. So here's the lesson: you are not selfish for saying no. You are not cruel for setting limits. You are not ungrateful for refusing to enable dysfunction. You are allowed to leave. You are allowed to speak up. You are allowed to write a new story, even if it means you become the villain in someone else's. Because sometimes, being the villain in their version is the only way to be the main character in your own. And if you're reading this, nodding along, feeling that ache in your chest because this sounds too familiar, I want you to know something. You're not alone. You're not broken. And you're not bad for finally wanting something better. You deserve peace. You deserve reciprocity. You deserve love that doesn't keep score. And most of all, you deserve to come home to yourself.